The gift was tied with pink ribbon. My daughter had just turned 7, and the second I saw my sister smile, I should have known something wasn't right. My name is Celeste Harmon. I built my life the hard way. I grew up in a cramped 2-bedroom house in Columbus, Ohio, where my mother stretched a single paycheck across 5 mouths and called it plenty. She did it with a quiet grace I've never forgotten. As a child, I swore I'd never let her carry that load alone once I was grown, and I kept that promise. By 34, I was a senior marketing director at a downtown firm. I owned a 4-bedroom colonial in Westerville. I drove a car that didn't shake on the highway. Most of all, I was there for my daughter Mia, in every way my own childhood had lacked. My younger sister Danielle was 31 and still figuring out her path. I never judged her for it. I paid her rent twice, covered her car note once, sent money back to Mom every month without being asked. Because to me, that was love. Quiet, steady, unconditional. But love, I've learned, can also be a blindfold. Mia's 7th birthday fell on a Sunday in September. Balloons, laughter, buttercream cake. Danielle arrived last, carrying a present tied with pink ribbon and wearing a smile I'd never quite seen on her face before. Warm on the surface, but hollow underneath. I didn't name it then. I should have. Mia tore through the wrapping paper the way 7-year-olds do, without ceremony, without suspicion. The rest of us watched. I was the only one who should have been paying closer attention. Inside was a tablet. Not a toy, a real one. The latest model. Retail price around $400. I knew because I'd been considering that exact tablet for Mia's Christmas gift and kept talking myself out of it, thinking she was still too young. Danielle knew that. I'd mentioned it during one of our Sunday calls, the kind where I did most of the talking and she did most of the listening. Or so I thought. Mia squealed and hugged Danielle like she'd hung the moon. My mother clapped from her lawn chair, beaming. My husband, Marcus, smiled politely and reached for more cake. I smiled too, genuinely at first. But something tugged at the back of my mind. Quiet, persistent, like a loose thread you notice but don't pull. Danielle was 3 months behind on rent. I knew because I'd covered it. She'd called me crying, said her hours had been cut, said she was barely keeping her head above water. So where did $400 come from? I told myself not to question a kind gesture. Told myself I was being ungrateful. That night, after the guests left and Mia fell asleep clutching her new tablet, I carried the wrapping paper to the trash. Something small slipped out from between the folds. A folded receipt with a name on it that wasn't Danielle's. I stood in my kitchen at 10:47 p.m. holding that receipt under the overhead light like it was evidence at a crime scene. Because that's exactly what it was. The name on the receipt was Marcus. My husband. I read it 3 times, then a 4th. My brain kept offering reasonable explanations. Maybe he'd helped her pick it out. Maybe he'd loaned her the money as a surprise. Maybe there was some innocent coordination I simply wasn't aware of. I've always been good at building exits for other people's behavior. I folded the receipt, slid it into my back pocket, and walked upstairs. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom and watched Marcus sleeping. One arm thrown across his side of the bed, breathing slow and untroubled. The face of a man with nothing to hide. Or the face of a man who'd been hiding things so long, he'd forgotten what exposure felt like. I didn't wake him. I didn't confront anyone. Instead, I went back downstairs, poured 2 fingers of bourbon I rarely touched, and sat at my kitchen island in the dark. I thought about the way Danielle had watched me open that gift, not with a generous aunt's excitement, but with something else. Her eyes sliding sideways toward Marcus for just a half second. I hadn't registered it then. I registered it now. The question wasn't just where the money came from. The question was, how long had this been happening? And what exactly was this?
I didn't sleep. Not real sleep. Just that shallow, torturous state where your body lies still but your mind runs laps around every memory you thought you understood. I started going back. 6 months, 8 months, a year, replaying moments I'd filed away as ordinary. Now, I held each one up to a new, terrible light. The way Marcus had offered to drive Danielle home from Christmas dinner last year, alone, while I stayed behind helping Mom with dishes, assuming he was just being considerate. The weekend he said he had a work conference in Cincinnati. I'd been buried in a campaign launch, barely looked up from my laptop when he kissed me goodbye. Danielle had mentioned that same weekend she was visiting a friend downstate. I'd never connected those two sentences, until now. The way she'd started texting him directly. Little things, car recommendations, a playlist he'd mentioned. I'd seen those exchanges and felt nothing. Why would I? He was her brother-in-law. Familiarity was natural. Except I was remembering the texture of those moments differently now. The slight pause before Marcus answered her texts when I was in the room. The way Danielle stopped complaining about being lonely around the same time Marcus started coming home 20 minutes late. Small things, individually meaningless. Together, a map. I pulled out my phone and opened the joint account we used for household expenses. Scrolled back 4 months through transactions I trusted without reading. 3 withdrawals. Cash. $200 each. Every single one on a weekend I'd worked late. My bourbon glass was empty. My chest felt like concrete. There's a particular kind of grief that comes not from losing someone, but from realizing who they actually were. That grief doesn't announce itself. It just quietly dismantles everything you thought was solid. I gave myself exactly 48 hours not to fall apart, to get organized. I'd spent my entire adult life solving problems with clarity and precision. I wasn't about to let betrayal turn me into someone I didn't recognize. I called my friend Renee, a family attorney I'd met through work 3 years earlier. Told her I needed a private consultation. She didn't ask questions over the phone, just said Tuesday at noon, and texted her office address. Then I contacted a private investigator named Gary Whitfield, recommended through a colleague who'd gone through a quiet, ugly divorce 2 years prior. Gary was expensive, discreet, and according to my colleague, completely emotionless, in the best possible way. I needed emotionless right now. I told neither Marcus nor Danielle anything. I went about my week with surgical normalcy, cooking dinner, answering emails, laughing at Mia's knock-knock jokes, kissing Marcus goodnight like my skin wasn't crawling. The performance of my life. Literally. What I didn't tell anyone was what Gary found within 72 hours. Not just confirmation of what I already suspected, but something so much worse. Something that reframed not just the last few months, but the last 3 years of my marriage, and every vulnerable, trusting conversation I'd ever had with my sister. He sent me a single photograph first, then a document. I sat in my parked car outside Mia's school and opened it. My hands didn't shake. My eyes didn't water. I simply went completely, terrifyingly still. The photograph was taken outside an apartment building I'd never seen. Marcus's hand on the small of Danielle's back, her head tilted toward his shoulder. The timestamp read 14 months ago. 14 months. Mia had just turned 6. I'd been working 70-hour weeks trying to close. I met with Renee and laid everything on the table. The withdrawals, the lease, the photograph, the timeline. She looked at me with steady, professional eyes and said I had an exceptionally strong case for both divorce proceedings and asset protection. I instructed her to begin quietly. Nothing filed yet, nothing visible. Because Marcus didn't know what I knew, and Danielle didn't know what I knew. And my greatest advantage
The only one that mattered was that they both still believed I was exactly who I'd always been to them. Trusting, generous, blind. I invited the whole family to dinner the following Saturday. Mom, Marcus, Danielle, Mia. I cooked everything from scratch, set the table beautifully, and smiled like a woman with absolutely nothing on her mind. There's a difference between revenge and justice. Revenge is emotional. Justice is architectural. I'd spent 2 weeks building something neither of them could dismantle, appeal, or escape. Dinner was warm and unhurried. Mom talked about her garden. Mia performed an entire comedy routine involving a rubber chicken she'd gotten at school. Marcus poured wine and laughed at all the right moments. Danielle complimented my roasted chicken twice and asked for the recipe, like we were still the sisters we'd pretended to be. I gave it to her, smiled, and gave it to her. After dessert, I asked Mom to take Mia upstairs to pick out a bedtime story. Mom read the room the way only mothers can. She said nothing, just gathered Mia gently and disappeared up the staircase. The three of us sat at the table. I reached into the folder I'd kept on the kitchen counter all evening, unremarkable, just sitting there, and placed 3 items on the table with the quiet precision of someone who had rehearsed nothing, because she needed to rehearse nothing. The photograph, the lease agreement, and bank statements with every withdrawal highlighted in yellow. Neither of them spoke. Marcus reached for the photograph first. His jaw tightened. Danielle's face dissolved from confusion into something that looked almost like relief, like a secret finally exhaled after being held too long. That reaction told me everything I needed to know about her remorse. There wasn't any. I looked at them both and said with complete calm, "Renee filed this morning. The house is mine. Marcus signed a postnuptial 18 months ago that he clearly forgot about. The joint accounts are frozen. And Danielle?" I turned to my sister. "Mom knows. I told her before you arrived."
The sound Danielle made wasn't crying. It was collapse. Justice doesn't roar. I learned that at my own dinner table, watching 2 people unravel in complete silence, while my daughter laughed at a bedtime story 1 floor above us. Marcus left that night with an overnight bag and the hollow dignity of a man who understood he'd already lost. He didn't beg. I think some part of him was relieved, too. Relieved that the exhausting architecture of deception had finally given way. We talked through attorneys from that point forward. Clean, documented, finished. Danielle tried to speak 3 times before anything coherent came out. She said she was sorry, that it had meant nothing, that she loved me. I believed exactly none of it. Not because I was bitter, but because I'd watched her face when she handed me that gift. That sideways glance toward Marcus. That hollow smile. A woman genuinely sorry doesn't perform generosity at the scene of her own crime. I told her calmly that I loved her the way you love someone you're grieving. Past tense dressed in present clothing. Then I asked her to leave. Mom stayed. Washed every dish without being asked. Moving through my kitchen with the quiet grief of a woman processing the fact that one daughter had burned the other down slowly over 14 months. Inside a family she'd sacrificed everything to hold together. Before she left, Mom held my face in both hands and said nothing. Just looked at me. That was enough. That was everything. In the months that followed, I renegotiated my contract, received a promotion, and bought out Marcus's share of the Colonial without blinking. Mia still doesn't know the full truth. She knows Daddy lives somewhere else now. She knows Aunt Danielle and I need space. Children understand distance, even when they can't name it. The same way I'd built everything, without applause, without an audience, without anyone's permission. Some mornings, I stand in my kitchen with coffee and look out at the backyard where Mia's swing set catches the early light, and I feel something I didn't expect to feel on the other side of all this. Not anger, not satisfaction. Peace.
The kind you can only earn by refusing to become what was done to you. Celeste Harmon, 35 years old, still standing.